All right, we are recording. It is December 14, and this is a workshop on the proposed mitigations for the I-205 toll program. With us today is ODOT and their team from WSP. And so I'd like to introduce Mandy and Nicole to lead our workshop today. My understanding is that there will be a lot of material to cover that is included in the packet that's posted online for the I-205 tolling diversion subcommittee. And so audience members who view this later can go find those materials there, and some of it will be shown by a PowerPoint presentation. But then because there is a lot of material, I think the team for the most part is asking that you hold on until the end to ask questions, but I think that Mandy, Nicole, and the team will identify other opportunities to chime in where that's an opportunity. And that'll conclude my statements, and I'll go make sure everybody else can get in that needs to be in. Thanks.
Yes, well, welcome everyone. I guess, Mandy, are you taking over?
I am, if you're ready for me.
Okay, looks like Mayor Hotz is joining us and Councilor Lewis is joining us, so just give them a minute to settle in. And Councilor Pratt is with us. Okay, I guess we'll carry on. Trent did his somewhat introduction that this was a workshop and asked everyone to hold their comments towards or questions towards the end unless ODOT staff who are presenting today feel it might be a great opportunity to inject or ask for any questions. If so, just speak up. And I will now turn it over to Mandy.
Great. Thank you so much, Commissioner Savas, and thank you all of us. Thank you to all of you for having us today again. I know that 2 hours is a lot of time to carve out of your schedules, and we do appreciate it. We're hopeful that today we can get to some of the details that we don't seem to always have time for our 1 hour conversations that we've been having for the past number of months. So we do have a lot of information consolidated into our slide deck today. We think we will get through it with a lot of time for questions at the end. And so we have the information organized kind of by geographic area. And to make sure that we get through all of the different areas, that our thought was that if we could hold questions until the end, that would make sure we were able to allocate enough time for all of them to describe the content. However, if you have a burning question or want a clarification as we're moving along, please do raise your hand or put a comment in the chat, and we'll try to monitor that as we go. Because we do want this your workshop, your session, and we want it to be as helpful as possible for all of you. So I'm going to kick off the conversation today, and then we'll turn it over to Nicole McDermott to go through the more technical slides about the process we went through and our findings. And then we also have Chris Wellender here with us to help us with Q&A if needed. So that's kind of the core team that we have today. I think that I have met most of you or all of you before, but as a reminder, I'm Mandy Putney. I work with ODOT's Urban Mobility Office, and my portfolio includes the construction project that's currently underway at the Abernathy Bridge for the first phase of the I-205 improvements project, as well as the tolling projects that are currently going through environmental analysis under the National Environmental Policy Act, which includes the I-205 tolling project. This has been a lot of work in the making to get to where we are today, and many of you have been along for every step of the way. We are approaching the draft environmental assessment, which is a key milestone in the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, process. And we have made a considerable amount of progress over the past year. We have tried to work hard to share our work with you and your staff as we move forward. We shared the analysis as it was available, all of us learning together as we move forward with this analysis. We have taken a relatively linear process, which is typical for the NEPA process, and sometimes frustrating because we don't have all the answers to all the questions at the same time. First, for this project, we were able to do the traffic analysis needed to show that when you do variable rate pricing and add the missing third lane to the section of 205, there is significant reduction on I-205 when you're looking at congestion levels in the future and comparing that to doing nothing, as well as a noticeable increase in predictability. After that, we were able to expand the traffic analysis in our findings as it was coming in and look at travel pattern changes off of the interstate system. And once we understood that, we were able to identify impacted locations that are associated with this project. Once we knew the impacts, then we moved on to the next phase, which is where we are now, to think about what is the resolution to those locations that would be impacted. And the NEPA term is mitigation, which is what's used to describe how do you resolve that impact that's caused by the project. So we can go on to the next slide here. We have been providing a variety of updates, and I think we heard at the last meeting that really there hasn't been enough time to fully delve in some of the information. Many of you have staff that support you or your transportation departments, and they have been much more involved. I'll say that, we see some of them on a weekly basis as we're going through our findings and analysis, and we really do appreciate the time that they have provided for this project as we move forward as well. So today we really want to set aside more time to fully update you on the proposal, the variety of mitigation projects that are proposed as part of this NEPA analysis. And those mitigation projects, once they're finalized, they do become part of the project. So not an option, but considered as essential to the project for moving forward. We also want to make sure that we do this in advance of the draft environmental assessment. And we've been trying hard to kind of do a new playbook in terms of how to move forward with the NEPA process and not make people wait until we have it all compiled in the environmental assessment, but really to share as we go. We also want to explain the value that we've gotten from talking to your staff as we've been doing this analysis and mitigation planning, and how that's been incorporated into the projects that we have to share with you today. And then I'll wrap up with kind of next steps as we're thinking about the NEPA process and the environmental assessment. Next slide, please. Just quickly, as in terms of how we got here, a little bit more about how we got here today. We have not been doing this work alone. We've leaned heavily on the expertise of the region as we've been developing this project. And this is kind of some of the meetings that have happened that have informed the work that we've done today. So we have pulled together modeling experts from around the region. We've worked with transit and multimodal professionals. We now have our regional tolling advisory committee moving forward, our equity and mobility advisory committee. This group, we, as I mentioned, meet regularly with staff, including Clackamas County staff. And all of those conversations have been instrumental first in determining what our traffic methodologies would be. So what was our approach for how we were going to do the work, to get agreement on that from the region, to determine performance metrics. And we got input from the Equity Mobility Advisory Committee, as well as a variety of other technical staff, and then to review the analysis as it's been coming in. So we do have a team of experts at ODOT and our consultant team, and we wanted to make sure that their work was kind of checked and agreed to by other modelers and experts in the region. So that's why we're here now. We've had a series of workshops and then follow-up workshops on mitigation. And with that, I will hand it over to Nicole to go into more detail about what the workshops were, who was involved, and what we found out during them, and then what we're proposing today.
Right. Thank you, Mandy. So as Mandy mentioned, we did complete a series of mitigation workshops this summer with your technical staff. And I wanted to provide an overview of the participants in those workshops, what we heard, and then how we've made adjustments to reflect that feedback. Next slide. So these workshops were really set up as collaborative conversations with staff. We wanted to review the project benefits and impacted intersections and discuss that potential mitigation. We held 4 workshops that were focused on the different kind of sub areas or geographic areas that Mandy mentioned before, which is also how the presentation today is organized. And those areas are based on where we were seeing project impacts. So the workshops included staff from Oregon City, Lake Oswego, West Lynn, Canby, as well as Canby Area Transit, Tualatin, River Grove, and Gladstone, who was invited to the Oregon City workshop but was unable to attend. So we held a separate just meeting with Gladstone staff. We also included TriMet and SMART in several of the workshops. Clackamas County staff participated in all 4 of the workshops, and then Washington County participated in the Tualatin workshop. Next slide. So at those workshops, we received a lot of questions, just kind of a high level overview of some of the key points that we heard. And we received a lot of questions about safety and how we were analyzing safety, what safety mitigations were being proposed. We heard some concerns about mitigation projects that would actually increase travel capacity through local communities. So for example, concerns about adding a roundabout or increasing travel lanes and how that could potentially attract more traffic. And so therefore staff was also expressed some interest in us looking at multimodal solutions, as well as improvements that would address vehicular operations and capacity. Staff provided input on local plans and projects and specific conditions that they thought we should incorporate into our analysis, and we have done that to a large degree. All the workshops included discussions of transit service and access and how transit could improve overall mobility in these areas. And then we also received questions just about how the area of potential impact was selected and why certain intersections were included and in the analysis and others were not. And as Mandy mentioned, a lot of that methodology came from coordination with regional partners and discussions through different groups over many months. So we explained that at the workshops and have had follow-up to address specific questions on that as well. Next slide. So how we've addressed some of this feedback, we have addressed the feedback from the summer workshops by really taking another look at safety. And we've worked really closely with Clackamas County safety staff to develop criteria for analyzing safety impacts and identifying safety specific mitigations. So we've incorporated many of the ideas that we heard at the workshops and really looking differently at the impacts in particular along Oregon 99E and how those impacts are kind of maybe a system impact versus just looking at individual intersections. So this has really led to a corridor kind of approach to mitigation, which we'll present later today. And as pointed out at the workshop, some of the intersections in our analysis were really kind of on the cusp of not meeting mobility standards. So where they were right at the standard, we have incorporated those into the list of impacted intersections and are now proposing mitigations for those as well. And we've also added some additional active transportation improvements based on things we heard at the workshops. Next slide. So before we go through the specific impacts and proposed mitigations by area, I wanted to provide a reminder of the process for the operational and safety analysis. Next slide. So through those coordination meetings that we've talked about and with the regional modeling group, the transit multimodal working group, the ongoing meetings with staff and the mitigation meetings, the project team identified and then refined based on the stakeholder input, the area of potential impact, modeling methodology, safety analysis criteria, and then we completed the traffic operations, bicycle, pedestrian, transit, and safety analyses to identify where there were those project impacts and benefits, and then developed the proposed mitigations. And then through those additional conversations, refined those mitigations based on the partner feedback. So in addition to those summer mitigation workshops, we have over the last couple of weeks had more recent follow-up meetings with each of the jurisdictions, and we presented the revised mitigations. So those are the same mitigations that we will present here today. And the results and the comments we received as part of those follow-up meetings will be incorporated into the process as we continue to refine these mitigation packages and finalize them before the revised EA and before they become those mitigation commitments that Mandy mentioned earlier. Next slide. So we again organized by sub area. So we're going to start with the Oregon City and Gladstone area. Next slide. So for each area, we want to go through the impacted intersections first, and then we'll show a graphic that includes the mitigations for each of the area. So for Oregon City, the impacted intersections in this sub-area include the 7th and Main Street, which is only impacted in 2027. This impact goes away by 2045. And then Oregon 99E and the I-205 ramps, Oregon 99E and 14th Street, Oregon 99E and Arlington Street, and Oregon 99E and Jennings Avenue. And so as you can see noted on the screen, some of these intersections were impacted based on just the operations analysis, while others were just safety impacts when we did our safety analysis. And then some we were seeing impacts from an operations and a safety standpoint. And then the impacted segments, so for a safety analysis, we don't just look at intersections and potential safety implications there, but there are also potential safety implications along the connections between the intersections, and that's the segment analysis that we did. And based on that, we saw an impact at Oregon 99E from Southeast Glen Echo to West Dartmouth Street and from West Arlington Street to Main. And I do see a hand raised, so I can pause for a minute. Mayor Hodson.
Thanks, Nicole. Sorry just a quick question on
No, that's okay.
When we are discussing the whole aspect here of the 7th Street and Main Street, and that it's not something that we're going to see being an impacted intersection in 2045. When we say that we don't see that being an impact any longer, how do we know that, and why would that no longer be an impacted area? Because of the mitigation pieces there at that intersection, or we just think that traffic patterns will have created some sort of a return to where they were prior to the need for the mitigation? Like what? Sorry, so just kind of what plays into that?
Yeah. So so we did the traffic analysis for 2027 and 2045. So when we're looking at, and we've primarily focused the mitigation conversations on the 2027 analysis as more of those near-term impacts. And for 2045, a lot of times we are looking at monitoring to determine, if and when those mitigations actually be needed, because a lot can change in the traffic patterns between now and 2045. And so what we're seeing for that intersection where there's a 2027 impact, we're seeing in 2027 that impact exceeds the mobility threshold. But again, as you said, based on different changes in travel patterns, different things that may be happening between 2027 and 2045, by the time it reaches 2045, that intersection no longer is exceeding the mobility standard. So it's not about the mitigation specifically in that location. It's about just other things happening on the system and traffic operations changing the impact at that specific location.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so I think next slide, we can go through these mitigations in this location. So based on those impacts, the proposed mitigations in the downtown Oregon City area, we've identified here on this graphic, and I want to walk through the intersection improvements first. So at Oregon 99E and the I-205 on-ramps, mitigation includes adding a second left turn lane to the off-ramp, adding a second southbound left turn lane to the on-ramp, adding a second northbound right turn lane to the on-ramp, and widening the on-ramp to the two receiving lanes to accommodate those additional turn lanes. And then that those 2 receiving lanes would taper into 1 lane. At Oregon 99E and 14th Street, mitigation is proposed to include adding a second southbound left turn lane to 14th Street, prohibiting westbound left turn lanes and beginning a 3rd northbound lane on Oregon 99E at that point. And then at Oregon 99E and 10th Street, we're proposing to extend the southbound left turn lane back to 12th Street at Oregon 99E. Then there are some other improvements in the downtown Oregon City area beyond just the specific intersection improvements. So looking at a transit bypass lane for the ramp meter on the southbound on-ramp, converting the 15th Street to a one-way with 2 right turn lanes, again, one of those feeding directly into the additional lane on Oregon 99E, widening the sidewalk on Oregon 99E between 10th and Main, providing some safety improvements, which would actually be, I'll cover on the next slide. And then a proposed new signal at 10th and Main. We do need to complete a final signal warrant analysis there, implementing some transit signal priority, which will also require identifying what the appropriate technology to do that transit signal priority will be, and then implementing some queue bypass or advanced greens for transit, and improving access from the bike lane to the sidewalk across the Clackamas River Bridge. So we are continuing to have conversations with Oregon City staff. Again, based on those most recent conversations we have, we may be refining some of these mitigations, and we may also be looking at completing a micro simulation of the downtown area to more specifically kind of look at the nuances of that downtown Oregon City area, given some physical constraints there, which and all of that information would inform the revised EA. Next slide. Looking at the Gladstone area, mitigation includes the intersection improvements at Oregon 99E and Arlington Street, and then proposed safety improvements, which you'll see similar safety improvements kind of as we go throughout the presentation, which includes installing some yellow retroreflective sheeting on the signal backplates, so that enhances visibility, especially at night, and has potential to reduce crashes by about 15%. We could add trees along the roadway, which is a traffic calming measure here, and that could also reduce crashes by about 10%. Installing mid-block pedestrian crossings with rectangular rapid flashing beacons could reduce pedestrian and bicycle crashes by about 10%, and then installing a raised median could reduce crashes by about 22%. And these crash reduction factors are based on ODOT methodology, and so that's where we've taken all of those things and applied those safety measures and seen in our predictive safety analysis, seen a reduction in crashes based on that methodology. Next slide. So then looking at Lake Oswego and West Lynn, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. There's one impacted intersection in this area in 2027, and that is Oregon 43 and McVeigh. So at this location, we are proposing signal coordination and adaptive signal control on Oregon 43 from McVeigh to A Avenue. We're also proposing pedestrian improvements at Oregon 43 and at McVeigh with a leading pedestrian interval, which
Nicole, sorry, should we go to the next slide?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, apologies. So yes, so the signal coordination and adaptive signal control on Oregon 43 and McVeigh to A, and then the proposed pedestrian improvements at Oregon 43 and McVeigh, that leading pedestrian interval, which is where pedestrians get an advanced walk signal ahead of signal turning green. So we're also proposing some enhanced signage to increase awareness of the pedestrian crossings at that locations. Next slide. And then looking at impacts in West Lynn, those we're not actually seeing 2027 impacts there. We're seeing 2045 impacts, but we are proposing some pedestrian and traffic calming improvements on 12th Street and Willamette Falls Drive. These improvements include things like improved crosswalks, those rectangular rapid flashing beacons, school zone signage, bike lanes along 12th from Willamette Falls Drive to Tualatin Avenue. And next slide. Next slide. So looking at the Tualatin River Grove area, the impacted intersections we see in this area are I-5 southbound and northbound ramps with Nyberg Street, and then Stafford Road and Rosemont Road, Stafford Road and Mountain Road, and Stafford Road and Childs Road. And we have noted here that Stafford and Mountain is only a partial project impact. So this is an intersection that would require a shared investment strategy to implement that mitigation. So the impacted segments include Stafford Road and Southwest Johnson or Stafford Road from Southwest Johnson to Childs Road in this area. Next slide. So the mitigation for the I-205 ramps and Nyberg intersections in this location, due to constraints, it's hard to provide some physical improvements. So based on initial conversations with staff, we are proposing participation in a planned bike and pedestrian improvement project the city has already has in the works. So completing that and then installing the retro reflective sheeting on the signal backplates again to enhance visibility and safety to help with those safety improvements. Next slide. So we talked about the Stafford Road and Borland Road area as part of the Tualatin workshop. We also discussed some of these as part of Westland and Lake Oswego workshop. But on Stafford Road, we're proposing a roundabout at Stafford and Mountain, and always stop at Borland and Eck, adding pedestrian improvements at Stafford and Rosemont, and installing speed feedback signs along Stafford to help manage this speed in that area, and which can enhance safety. And then Stafford and Childs intersection is not an operational impact until 2045, which was noted on that prior slide. So that's why you're not seeing mitigation shown on this graphic for the Stafford and Childs location beyond those safety improvements. But this location would be monitored to identify the timing and need for mitigation. All right, so the Canby area, our last sub area. Go to the next slide. Yeah, thank you. Impacted intersections in the Canby area include Oregon 99E and South.
Nicole,
Yep.
can I just
Yes.
let you know, there's a comment in the chat here.
Yeah.
When you just said could apply, Councilor Baumgartner, could apply, does it mean it may or may not happen? And does shared expense mean shared with the county? And so I think you were talking about could apply in terms of 2045.
Yeah. So sorry, I apologize. I don't remember exactly which sentence I said could apply in, but if it was 2045, I think the could is, related to, we need to monitor that location to determine exactly, the timing and the appropriate mitigation given changes that may occur between now and 2045.
Based on what we know, though, could you share what we think the mitigation would likely be?
Yeah, what we're looking at on for Stafford and Childs right now, we've looked at an expansion of the planned roundabout there. So there's a planned roundabout at Stafford and Childs, and making that a 2-lane roundabout would be would mitigate for the operational impacts there. It is a costly project, and so I think again monitoring to determine the appropriateness of that and timing is definitely something that will be important.
Could I just ask a question? I'm sorry, now that I've interrupted. I just typed it into the chat because I didn't want to forget my question, but it was actually not the Stafford and Childs intersection. It was a few intersections ago. The phrasing was generally being, you were using it, at least I was interpreting you were using it to apply to Gladstone area too, Oregon City area. You were saying, it sounded like to my ear anyway, that you were saying this might be needed, or could apply. And so I'm just wondering, I'm hanging up on that because I guess I don't know how bad things need to get before they're seen to need to be required, because I've seen some pretty bad traffic just be allowed, diversion traffic. And so that's kind of one question I'd really like to have addressed at some point in this presentation, is how bad things need to get, or what is the measure of that we're not going to allow it to get past, I guess. Thank you.
I can take that to start. So what we're presenting here are the proposed mitigations based on the impacts we're seeing in 2027. And so we are seeing that there are operational and safety impacts in 2027. So we are proposing these mitigations to address those impacts. And if, these are we still need to refine some of these mitigations and finalize them with partners as we prepare the revised EA. But once we get to that revised EA and the final mitigation projects that are included in that revised EA, as Mandy mentioned earlier, those become commitments and those become part of the project. So it's not a could happen or may happen or should happen. It is a will happen, and those are part of the projects. So at this point, we're still in the refinement process, and these are the proposals that we have today, and still need to continue working with you all and technical partners to make sure they are the right mitigations before we get to that commitment stage. But once we get there, it is a commitment. I hope if that answers.
Yes, I'll keep listening, but yes, thank you.
Okay, so yeah, can be. And thanks, Mandy. Yeah, interrupt me again. I'm just
Sorry.
so many different things on my screen. I'll miss those chats or hands sometimes, but happy to take the questions as they come. So for the impacted intersections in Canby, we're seeing Oregon 99E and South End Road, Oregon 99E and New Era / Haynes Road, Oregon 99E and Ivy Street, and Oregon 99E and Lone Elder Road. And then the impacted segment from a safety standpoint here is Oregon 99E from Redwood to Ivy. Next slide. The proposed mitigations in Canby include intersection improvements, which would be at Oregon 99E and South End Road, adding a traffic signal, again, pending a final signal warrant analysis, and then adding a southbound through lane and a northbound right turn lane at that location. For Oregon 99E and Haynes Road / New Era Road, installing a roundabout and adding a southbound right turn lane onto New Era with approaching Haynes, and as well as providing some bus stop improvements at that location. And then on Oregon 99E and Lone Elder, squaring up, it's currently kind of a skewed approach, so squaring that up and providing a southbound refuge lane for westbound left turns. And then some other improvements in Canby would include the bike and pedestrian improvements on Oregon 99E and Ivy, and then safety improvements on Oregon 99E from Redwood to Ivy, which again it's similar to other things we've talked about for the other areas. Could include those or would include those yellow reflective sheeting to the signal backplates, and installing a left turn kind of traffic calming treatments at Ivy and 99E. So this could be like a hardened center line or left turn kind of wedge to make people make a more 90-degree turn at that location. Installing some speed feedback signs, and installing some coordination or adaptive signal timing along 99E. But we did hear just in our recent meeting with Canby that some of that adaptive signal and signal coordination has already been done. So that's one item that we're continuing to work with Canby on, and determine if that is all already in place or if that could be extended as part of the mitigation as well. We also, as part of that, our most recent meeting with Canby, And there was a suggestion to include improvements at 99E and Pine Street to address mobility in the downtown area, given the amount of physical constraints that existed at 99E and Ivy. So the team will be looking at that as we continue to refine the mitigations. So that completes the presentation kind of by sub area for each of the impacted intersections and mitigations. And so I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Mandy.
I'll just talk a little bit more about next steps. And I think this, my intent is to provide a little more detail here about some of Councilor Baumgartner's questions, perhaps the questions I think maybe others might have around the table. And then we'll turn it over to all of you for your questions and comments about any of these specific projects or like our sub area approach. And we're open to discussion. So next slide, please. Just to, to clarify kind of this environmental process, which is a process that I don't think many have gone through at this scale. Again, as we're going through the analysis, we're developing proposals for mitigation. So those proposals will be reviewed when the environmental assessment and the rest of the findings are published in the draft environmental assessment. We're currently looking at February timeframe for that draft environmental assessment. We will then receive all the comments that come in from our participating agencies, the tribes, as well as the public and other partner agencies that have not elected to be participating agencies, but are still very much able to provide comment on the draft. And all of those comments are reviewed. Analysis is further refined, and then we publish a revised or a final environmental assessment. And so that both the draft and the final will look at mitigation proposals for 2027 as well as 2045. Here today, you got a very close-up look at the 2027 proposals. We also have a variety of options available for 2045 impacts. And we will have a monitoring process in place so that we can determine after the NEPA process is done, we can determine the exact timing of those mitigation improvements. So some of the 2045 mitigation projects might actually be needed in 2035 and some of them in 2040. So as we move forward in time, we'll be able to have a better understanding of when we'll need to bring those mitigation commitments on board. What the NEPA document and the federal decision document will do will be to codify that they are going to be done. And there'll be a process in place to provide some flexibility so that if they need to be done sooner or they need to be done slightly differently, that'll be possible too. And then once we know what the projects are, both for 2027 and 2045, we will be able to move forward with more detailed conversations about the jurisdictions involved in, oversight or management of those locations. Some of them are ODOT facilities, and so ODOT will move forward with thinking about implementation and timing. When there needs to be coordination with our local partners, we can do that either through a formal agreement or more informal, MOUs or IGAs or other ways to very clearly spell out timing and commitments and responsibilities. So our first step is what is it that we're going to do for mitigation? And then we can figure out the exact steps needed to get to implementation. So right now really is the what can we do? We're sure that we'll get more ideas after we publish the draft. And so these concepts will likely change between now and the final environmental assessment, but we do have a lot of confidence in this package. And it has been significantly improved through the workshops that we've gone through over the past few months. So with that next steps update, I will turn it back to the committee for discussion and conversation. And we're happy to pull slides up if you want to go back to specific maps or topics.
realizing we might not have a co-chair here with us. And so Councilor Sherman, I see that hand.
Thank you, Trent. Appreciate that. And you know, definitely appreciate the information, good information. I guess I have a couple of just very quick questions. One is that, and this is kind of based on this morning's conversation at C4 Metro Subcommittee as well. And it piggybacks, Mandy, off of a slide that you just showed, which is kind of the timing of RMPP implementation versus 205. And we had been discussing this morning just about the timing of 50, 60 gantries being put in place around the region. And my question really is, so in theory, is it possible that the regional congestion pricing could be introduced in a staggered fashion or in certain areas earlier than others? Or would it be something where the entire region kind of gets formulated and put together and then released all at the same time?
I think that's an interesting approach and idea, Councilor Sherman. We're just starting the analysis right now for NEPA for RMPP, and we've also look at the Regional Tolling Advisory Committee to help us with ideas of how to accelerate implementation of Regional Mobility Pricing Project, and do expect that to be an agenda item on their upcoming on an upcoming meeting. So I think all ideas are welcome right now. We're just like, the analysis is about to get underway in earnest. And so we might not need to know that level of detail for NEPA necessarily, but we would need to think about that in terms of the implementation contracts and vendors that would be on board.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm thinking about it more even just from just traffic flow, how that would potentially impact it if, you know, certain areas come online before others, and just the human nature aspect of people having changes and changing their behaviors over time. So, okay, one other question, and I mean this with the utmost love and respect. I'm kind of underwhelmed by the mitigation that we've been presented today, and it's. And maybe it's because the actual impacts are not going to be as great as, you know, a layperson would think. But when I see like reflective sheeting as a 10% reduction in safety, and I'm thinking that seems like a really cost-effective way that every single stoplight should have reflective sheeting on it. Why is this even a conversation about mitigation? Oregon 43, you know, there's implementation at I think it was McVeigh and 43, but other than that, really, other than some light timing of lights along Main Street there, not much else. And so maybe I'm missing that, like in 2027, the impact would not be that great initially. But I kind of, again, as a layperson, feel like, boy, if we put a program in place, the earlier mitigation requirements would be much greater than the longer term ones, because, you know, transportation alternatives haven't been put in place, people's behavior hasn't changed yet. And so what am I missing there? Is it that I was expecting to see like roundabout here, roundabout here, roundabout here, different stoplights over here, extra lane over here, because we're going to have potentially a lot more traffic on a lot of these arterials. Am I wrong in that assessment? And I'll be quiet now. Thank you.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll just give a high level response, and then, you know, if Nicole or Chris want to have more details, they could add them to my response. But as a reminder for NEPA, what we're analyzing is the future condition, and we're comparing that to the future condition with the project. So we know right now there's diversion on the local system. We know in the future, if we do nothing, there'll be diversion and more diversion on the local system, right? And if we do the project, how is that going to impact diversion as well as the interstate? And so we've reviewed at previous meetings kind of our methodology for how we're looking at impacts and how we're identifying impact locations. It turns out that there were impact locations, and they were in some ways pretty specific and based on the operational standards by the jurisdictions, and then also the safety measurements that we have. So it might be that there aren't as many impacts as you would think because of how severe, like things will be really bad if we don't do anything, right? It'll be bad on I-205 and it'll be bad on the local system. So adding the capacity to 205 provides a really good trip for many people to get where they want to go without congestion and in a very predictable way. And that's compelling. And so there's that balance between what trips are going to now go to 205 that would be there today, but can't, and what trips might take a different approach. And we've seen through our analysis that especially during the peak periods, 205 is a really compelling option for many drivers. And even with a toll, that will be compelling. And that the trips that divert or go through, take another route might do that more when it's off-peak hours. And some of those local roads then might have the capacity, they might not be overwhelmed at that point. So sometimes the new travel patterns result in impacts and sometimes they don't. And so for the impacts that we have identified, we feel that this is the right solution to resolve those impacts. And for the safety analysis, I can say there's a whole science behind like what you can measure and how you address safety impacts. And so these are things that have been found to significantly improve safety at locations. And so that was like kind of the methodology, the toolbox that is documented as being effective. So I get that some of them might seem underwhelming, but they do have considerable impact.
I appreciate that. And I apologize. I do quite often have a hard time. I conflate regional pricing and 205 in kind of the same overarching concept, because I know that they'll be intertwined, but I also know that we're kind of, our lane's a little bit narrower in the conversation today. So
well, you all are like ahead of the game because this is the same process that's going to happen for the regional mobility pricing project. And so you all will be the experts for the region in terms of like what to expect and what to ask about and what to, how to engage.
I appreciate the response. Thank you.
Mr. McCabe, I have you next.
Thank you, Trent. Some of the issues, okay, like what's kept on being used in this whole situation is 2015 traffic patterns and flows. And yet this problem goes back all the way to 2002. And so we here in the Stafford Hamlet area, we've had problems since 2002. And none of them are being addressed by anything that's being put out today. And we don't think we're being listened to. We have numerous problems, including people that once they know when they leave I-5 and they head I-205 northbound and they see the through lanes full, they just take that third lane, exit at Stafford Road and come down our roads at 55 plus. The roads aren't built for 55 plus. We have more accidents now in our vicinity than is ever done on I-205 by a report done by Clackamas County. So you are not helping us. And some of your reports today, I don't know who you're not talking to, because the Child's Roundabout is supposed to be completed before 2027, and Stafford Road will be closed when the roundabout is constructed, which is going to cause more problems in the area. I think a lot of people are not giving you information because you'll go, oh, you can't do that right now. And so people don't talk to you. And so to go along with that is in the city of West Lynn, Willamette Falls Drive, you are showing a new sidewalk on the north side that goes from Fields Bridge all the way up the road as something new. That sidewalk's already under construction. So it doesn't make any, and then there's another one they're not using the sidewalk in the park anymore. They're now the city of West Lynn is going to put one on Willamette Falls Drive, which makes the road much unsafe than what if they just left everything in the park where there is a separation for safety. And yet your drawings and all your reports show nothing. And then on Lake Oswego with the issue of people not crossing the road, yeah, it's not safe even now, even without 205 being built, it is not safe. And so people choose one side or the other to walk on now, and they stay there. They do not cross the Highway 43 portion because it's been unsafe for about 50 years. And to you guys to come in and say, this is what will make it safer. No, nothing will make it safer unless you make it one lane each way. The other issue is, which seems to be missed by your study, is the Bridgeport exit off of I-5. When the people look up and they see what the speed of time is to go from Bridgeport to Wilsonville, when they see it's above 5 minutes, they're exiting there already to use the local roads to get into Lake Oswego, Westland, Oregon City, even Wilsonville. And that is causing tremendous capacity issues in our region that, again, are not being addressed. And they have not been addressed since 2002. And it's very disconcerting. And I guess another thing from reading the issue and listening to and seeing how the election results happened just last month, loud and clear, Senator Wyden does not want this. And I don't think the two representatives that represent this region, they don't want it either. And they feel this is all incorrect. So I'm like, why not put on the brake now and really listen to us? Because we're not being listened to. I even mentioned at the last meeting, and so did Commissioner Sabas, that you guys are not going back far enough. I made a request for the traffic counts back in 2002 before the third lane came in. I still don't have them a month later. They are not in this presentation a month later. And that's why we think we're not being listened. We know we're not being listened to, and that is a horrible thing. End of comments.
Thank you, Mr. McCabe. And I can appreciate the frustration with the level of need that is in this region. And our project has a defined scope. It definitely was not developed to address all of the needs in the region. It really is centered around the I-205 corridor. And you're right, we can't through this one project solve all of the challenges that exist, and you noted many of them. So I agree that they exist today. Many of them have existed for a while. There's been a lot of conversation in the region that something needed to be done with 205. And so that's where this project is centered on, is figuring out how can we get the trips that should be on Interstate 205 on 205, and what's the best way to move forward with that. ODOT has received very clear direction from the legislature to move forward with this project. And so that's why I'm here, is to try to figure out how to make this the best project that it can be for all of you and for your constituents. That's the charge that ODOT has been given by the legislature at this point, is to figure out how to do tolling here in this location as a way to provide funds for the 205 improvements project. And so I am really trying to listen and to take input and to adjust as we can go forward, and to incorporate that feedback. Ultimately, I can't change the project direction. So I hear that that's frustrating, but those are kind of the parameters that I have to work in. And I do think that the feedback that has come from this committee and from your staff has been instrumental in helping us move forward, as well as the variety of committees that I mentioned earlier, to figure out how we can center equity and how we can do a toll program that's different than exists elsewhere. And then the last thing I'll just say is we are talking to technical staff about projects that are in motion and timelines. And as Nicole mentioned, we'll continue to refine our list as more details are known about those projects and construction schedules. So we'll provide those updates as we have them. And then, lastly, for NEPA, we do look only at the future. We don't look at what's happened before. But we are trying to figure out how this project would change future scenarios. And we rely on the regional traffic model for all of our work. So it's not a backward looking about, what happened or what should have happened, but really what can we do in the future?
Thanks for that. Before I call the next person, I see a hand in the audience, and I would just, and I think we talked about it earlier, kind of new. For those folks in the audience who have questions, please feel welcome to email me those questions. My email address is twilson2@clackamas.us. The workshop and the program has been reserved for the diversion subcommittee members and those elected officials and say 4 members who've been there. And so John McCabe's a good example, who's representing the Stafford Hamlets. And so there's other Stafford members in here too. You can also feed your question through Mr. McCabe or through me, again, twilson2@clackamas.us. Counselor Baumgartner, I have you next.
Thank you, Trent. So I put a question in, and I'll just start with that. What will the level of participation by localities be regarding the process going forward, this monitoring process? But to that, I'd like to add, I would be interested to know, and maybe this is just available somewhere and someone can just send me where to look this up, but I would like to know who is you're speaking to about some of these, like staff at the cities, who's on the regional tolling advisory, who's on the equity and mobility advisory. I would, and not so I can call those people. I'm just kind of, it just serves my curiosity to see, who is referencing the information you're sourcing, I guess. So generally, I would like to say that, and also I'd like to put another plug in for, and I've already said this once, more attention being paid to transit alternatives for West Lynn specifically, quite frankly, because, correct me if I'm wrong, but West Lynn has the least served TriMet service, or the least functional TriMet service of between Lake Oswego, Gladstone, Oregon City. That's been my experience anyway. So I think that if we had better service and better attention paid, quite frankly, to the local communities' transportation, maybe there wouldn't even be some of the problems that are happening on 205. But 205 is not, the local people use it for sure. I do, and I have all my life. I've lived here for 56 years. And so I have used I-205 in a way that I will now be would have gone through 4 tolling gantries when I drove to high school, for instance, and back home again. So I won't be driving on 205 as much as I used to, and neither will a lot of other people. So I just don't understand how this is going to work. But my biggest concern, and I may or may not be reflecting some of Mr. McCabe's concerns, it's not so much I'd like to see the modeling from 20 years ago, but my concern is it's been a huge problem. It's been unmanageable for Highway 43 from Lake Oswego to I-205 has been horrible for, 20 years. And so has Willamette Falls Drive. So that's why I'm really worried. So it's been this bad for this long. How bad does it have to get? And how long is it going to be allowed to be horrible? So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Councilor Baumgartner. I appreciate your comments and your questions. The beginning part, we can get you lists. The information is available online, but we'll compile for you because it's in many different places in terms of membership for our committees. And then I also heard a request of the staff that we met with as part of the workshops or ongoing coordination. So we have both a regional modeling group and then the mitigation workshops. And so we can compile that for you. And Trent, if I could maybe send it to you and then you want to distribute it to everybody, if that would be of interest to everybody, we're happy to do it that way. And then I think, what we've seen is that this project has helped shine the light on a lot of challenges that have existed and exist. And we're trying to figure out ways to move forward with this project and these conversations, and also be collaborative and supportive of broader regional conversations that really need to take place. So an example of that is that we've heard about, transit and the need for different transit or more transit, better access to transit. And specifically here in Clackamas County, but also comments as we're thinking about the regional pricing system. And so ODOT is working to co-convene now a group of folks from transit agencies around the region to think about a regional transit strategy that really is the best possible complement for regional pricing. So that work is underway now. And I've been in close conversations with TriMet about, working on an MOU so that we can really kind of nail down how ODOT and TriMet can partner together to think about supporting transit in this area specifically, and kind of the 205 travel shed. So those conversations are happening in addition to the conversations related to NEPA. And then the last thing I'll say, you had some questions about monitoring. So I believe this is a topic on a future subcommittee agenda. The meeting that was canceled recently, we had invited a guest speaker from the Washington Department of Transportation to share how they developed their monitoring program and how it's gone for them, and then to lead into a conversation about what you think would be best for us to keep in mind as we move forward with developing our monitoring approach for 205 and for our toll program. So there will be more conversations about that, and thinking about who's doing the monitoring and what are the tools we have and what do we want to monitor. So more to come about that, and you all will be engaged in that effort.
Thank you.
Councilor Pratt, I have you next.
Hi, Mandy. I've seen you many times, and I really appreciate the time that you and the other people from ODOT have put into listening and outreach. However, my concern is, and I think it might be shared, is that we give you input, but I don't see any changes occurring in your plans. And I guess what I'm wondering, and what also I think is happening, at least for me, is that we live in these communities and we see the traffic every day, and we kind of foresee what's going to happen. And you guys have used the best analysis tools you have, and often you're seeing something different. And I'm just going to say really quickly, like 65th and Berlin, I have such a concern for that one because it's not far from the tolling gantry, and we have a hospital there. So if we have terrible traffic there, I mean, that could be people's lives that are lost. So that one really concerns me. What I'm wondering is, after you put in these gantries, if you're going to look at the traffic after that and make changes, because I just can't imagine. I mean, maybe we're wrong with our, perspective from living in these communities, but will you be looking at it after these are put in to see how the traffic flows and make adjustments after that point?
Absolutely. So thank you for that, Councilor Pratt. And we do use modeling and technical tools, and throughout the process of determining what we're going to analyze in our methods, we've also tried to ground truth that with the public and with also staff at your jurisdictions. And we've adjusted kind of what we're analyzing and how, based on that, like real-time, real-life feedback. And then the monitoring question goes right in line with the Councilor Baumgartner's questions. So yes, we'll do monitoring, and we'll determine if things need to alter and flex. And so I do hope we can bring back WashDOT to kind of talk about the work that they did and the adjustments that they made and kind of how they set things up, because I think that is just a real example of something that's happened in recent times that will give us ideas of what we should be on the lookout for and the flexibilities that we could build in. And I'll have the team, I'll add to our to-do list to follow up on 65th and Borland and let you know what we found out about that location.
Thank you. Commissioner Morrow.
Thank you. And thank you for the presentation and just for the opportunity to have a better, more in-depth conversation about this. I know the venue we have is somewhat limiting, and so I do appreciate the opportunity to have this in an extended amount. At a couple meetings ago, we talked about how the improvements, I think there were 20 failing intersections, and you had said that there were 18 that were going to be covered by ODOT, and 2 were going to either be the cost sharing or on the cities. Is that still the case?
Nicole, do those numbers sound still right?
Those numbers still sound right to me. There's in 2027, it's just the one that's the cost sharing. And this is I might ask Chris to double check me on that. But yes, those numbers still sound accurate to me.
Okay. Do we know where those intersections are, in which cities?
So it's the Stafford and Mountain. So it's Clackamas County for the 2027. It's Stafford and Mountain is the partial project impact. If we can probably find out, Chris, and do you know off the top of your head?
Yeah, I think it's Stafford and Childs Road for 2045.
Okay, so
Okay.
both, yeah, county.
Thank you. And then another one, you were talking about how there are going to be safety improvements on 99 between Arlington and Maine. Could you go into more detail of what those safety improvements are? Forgive me if you did say that. I was writing quickly down some notes. So just a definition on what those safety improvements are going to be.
Yeah, sure, definitely. And we can pull back up the presentation too. I think they're listed on the presentation there, so we can have it there. And I can also just pull up on my other screen what they are. So for those safety improvements, we're looking at that reflective backing for the signals. We are also looking at street trees. So street trees a lot of times can help kind of just draw in, provide kind of a traffic calming measure, help draw in the visual of the driver and slow speeds, installing mid-block pedestrian crossings, which that's specific to the pedestrian and bicycle impacts and safety related to pedestrians and bicycles, and then installing a raised median as well. Those all are the safety improvements we've identified for that area.
Okay, I thank you for that. And I think those all sound great. And safety is definitely an issue that we need to be addressing. But when it comes to the operational impact and the fact that what we're seeing today without the tolls, the congestion there, I just have concerns about what mitigation can be proposed to actually help us out beyond safety, so that we can address the congestion that's going to be on the side streets, because we have I understand that it's not like we can have very many expansions on our side streets so that we can address that. So I just are there any conversations about how that could possibly be done? Because again, safety is an issue, but it's also going to be an issue that we need to address as far as congestion on our side streets goes.
Yeah, and just so what we're proposing here in Oregon City, this is an area where the corridor approach and the sort of layering of all of these different mitigations are, the real mitigation package that would improve mobility overall in the area and address the impacts that we're seeing from the project. So so we're proposing, the mitigations are proposed along 99E. So we're not currently, with the exception of some of the downtown core and 15th Street improvements, we're not proposing things on side streets. We haven't seen impacts that have resulted in needing to address kind of side street mitigations. And so Adela, if you can go back one slide. This shows where we are seeing, just to again look at where we're seeing those operational and safety impacts. So like for the Arlington Street example, we were just seeing that as a safety impact. And then for Oregon 990 and 14th, that was just an operational impact. But all of these mitigation proposals together will kind of layer in and help operations and safety overall. And so now, Adela, sorry, if you can go back to the map again. We can talk through some, so the specifics here, it really is about improving mobility at 9090 and those on ramps. That's a big congestion point. Adding in some of the transit signal priority and those types of improvements to, again, just provide another option to improve that overall mobility. Looking at some pedestrian improvements as well in the downtown core, more mobility options, and then how the 15th and 14th, turn lanes and the operations at those intersections work together and feed into additional lanes on 9090, and how that then again is corresponding with the ramp improvements. So I think that's all. These improvements are what we're seeing as being needed to address where we're seeing those project impacts. So again, it hasn't really extended into the side streets as we've seen in our analysis. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. And then I understand that there's a whole slew of things that will go beyond just adding to the physical streets that are going to hopefully address the congestion there. But I mean, the big one that it seems to rely on is the transit improvements. I was just talking to someone the other day who lives in Oregon City and was talking about how they're going to be transferring from going to Clackamas Community College to Portland State University. And they have a vision impairment, so they need to take the bus. And I asked them how long they're having to budget for that, and they said something around 2.5 hours. And so I don't really see how just adding some transit improvements for the signal priority is going to help. And I realize that's not under your jurisdiction. That has to do conversations with TriMet, and we need to be having those. But just expressing the concern that we all feel is that even if we're going to allow some transit signal priority, in the end, it really does come to more improvements to the service that is currently being provided there. And then lastly, is it possible to get a map of the proposed gantry locations? Because I've heard several times that it's going to be here, but I've never seen a graphic of that. And I will express something that Oregon City staff has always told me to continue to relay, is that, and I realize that this is up to the jurisdiction of the OTC, I believe, as to the final positioning of the gantries, but being a lot more strategic about where we place them can make a whole lot of difference with the diversion into our side streets. Whenever I'm going through Westland during peak hours, even my Maps app, my Apple Maps app, will tell me where to get through the diversion, to go past Westland High School, to get past all of that. So I know that my technology is going to give me the best route, and other people do too. And it's going to be really unfortunate when that becomes even more commonplace when the tolls are implemented. Thank you.
We will share a map. We'll add that to our follow-up items to send to Trent for distribution of the gantry locations. This presentation also can be available to you with these maps that show the proposed mitigation projects.
Commissioner Savas?
Yeah, I caught your last 15 minutes, and just prior to that, I was speaking in my other meeting that I had to jump to with Director Strickler on, sounds like almost the exact issue you're discussing. So no coincidence, I suppose. But I just want to make sure I heard everything right when they came in the last 15 minutes, and just convey something. And we've been saying this for a long time, so I know that Mandy, you've heard us repeat it, and I share that. And I don't think that Director Strickler had heard it as clearly as I've said it, because he hasn't really been in the room, so it hasn't really been conveyed to him. But I expressed that the base year of using 2015 as the base year and 2027 as that one period there that you're doing the modeling on, does not really truly reflect the diversion impacts. We've discussed this many times before on this committee. And, you know, I suggest going back to 2010 or 7 or 5 to get a better grip of the understanding of what the diversion that is being caused by the bottleneck, ODOT's responsibility, in my opinion, versus the diversion or congestion, not diversion, but the congestion that is being caused on our local streets by the local traffic. And so my concern is that if that's not factored in fairly and accurately, then there's an undue burden on the jurisdictions. Clackamas County, I can certainly say that for Clackamas County, I can use your Stafford Road examples, but I do want to get clarification on what I heard is that if those intersections are working, if there's a working intersection today, and let's say it's stressed because of the diversion as a result of the bottlenecks and just the congestion on 205 that's pushing people off the freeway today. And it's kind of working, but barely. And then this RMPP or tolling puts it over the edge. How much is ODOT going to be responsible for that? I mean, is county, I mean, how is that math being done in a way that's fair?
Well, I guess I don't know about, I can tell you how it's being done. And for 205 and for a similar process will be done for the Regional Mobility Pricing Project. So for NEPA, we look at the future. The need in this corridor is clearly understood. And you're right, it goes back way past 2015. So for NEPA, we do document the problems and we document the need. And again, our project scope is focused on I-205 and specifically the section between Stafford Road and Oregon 213. So it's not inclusive of every single transportation related issue in the corridor. We do have a narrow scope to look at that section of 205 and a proposal to evaluate of adding the missing third lane, doing the extensive seismic improvements that are needed on the bridges in that corridor, adding sound walls, and then adding variable rate pricing. So that's the project that we're evaluating. And in NEPA, once we establish the need, we then look at the future. So our future modeling is what the source is of our analysis, and we compare a future situation of not doing that project to a future situation where we do the project. And that's the comparison. So it's all rooted in forward-looking modeling based on what difference the project would make. And then do we see benefits or do we see impacts, or do we see both? And for the areas where we see that the project is a benefit, we describe them. For the areas where we see the project creates impacts, we describe that, and then we have the resolution, the path to resolution. So I understand the frustration that it's not able to address all of the existing problems, but it is set up to fully evaluate and solve the problems that are caused by the project, if there are any. So I'm in agreement that there's a lot of problems there. They've been here for a long time. I think that there's clear agreement about that. It's just that for NEPA, we do forward-looking analysis.
Yeah, understood. But as you are doing, and I won't belabor this, but as you're doing the forward looking, you're also going back to 2015 for a reason. I mean, and you know, you got to start somewhere. So I don't know where, when you look back and look forward, you know, you got to start somewhere. So I get that. But as you heard, Mandy, at the last RTAC meeting, the RTAC meeting, that there was a gentleman who spoke, I think he called in, and he was saying, you shouldn't be changing so many things at one time. You should just test the corridor after the project, which is really the lanes. I'm speaking about the lanes and the bridge, and then make your changes or do your analysis. And I'm kind of suggesting that if we did do that, we'd have a whole different picture. I think we'd have a whole different lens of what caused what and so forth. Yes, there is local traffic, and that's our responsibility on our local roads, for people to travel through those corridors. But when you say project, I'm not picking on you. When you say project, I'm thinking of three things. I'm thinking of the toll for the project, to build it, for the 129 to pay the bond. I'm thinking of the lane widening as a project, and I'm thinking of the RMPP. Those are the three projects. So when you say project, I'm always trying to discern which one you're talking about and which one I'm thinking of. And really, it's almost really one big project, but some of these smaller jurisdictions may not have the money. Even Clackamas County, we don't have a lot of money, even maybe to make the improvement today, for a problem that is not really borne by local traffic. Our
Understood.
local traffic.
Understood, Commissioner, and fair enough, because I often talk about all of those projects, so I should be more specific. And for just to be clear, so this presentation here is not about the regional mobility pricing project. This was about the I-205 toll project, and we've heard clearly from FHWA that we need to analyze tolling and the improvements, because we're not able to implement the improvements without pricing. And so they're together in the analysis, and we will then analyze the regional mobility pricing project building off of what we know for 205. So there'll be two separate NEPA processes for those separate toll projects, but they will be well coordinated in terms of the technical work. And then the other project, the construction that's underway at Abernathy, has already gone through a separate environmental process, and construction is there underway. So they're linked together. We can do one and then build off of it for the other one, but they are separate in terms of the actual evaluation.
Okay, Councilor Baumgartner, I see your hand again.
Thank you. I'm sorry to take another turn, but I looked around and didn't see any other hands, so I'll be quick. So I have a concern about not spending enough time thinking about alternatives. So again, I would just say, what do I need to do as a local elected who do I talk to about transit options, and who is working on this? And equally kind of on the other side of that, I remember participating in, I think it was kind of a webinar style meeting resource early in this process. And unfortunately, I cannot recall the name of the meeting. I've reached out and asked a couple of people, but I know it was specifically traffic engineers from around the country talking specifically about lane expansion and how it doesn't last. And I'm really worried about this. You know, the tolling is required because we have this lane expansion project, so we have to then toll to pay for it. But then the lane expansion will eventually tap out, or, you know, it won't continue with a beneficial, you know, the benefits of it. So can you help me understand or ensure that that has been completely researched, so we won't 20 or 30 or maybe even less years from now say, oh, well, I guess the expansion didn't really work after all?
I can give you a little bit of context in terms of regional planning. The regional transportation plan that Metro is responsible for, and Councilor Lewis can chime in here if she wants to course correct me as I move forward, has for a number of years included a pretty clear policy that the interstate system should be 3 lanes in each direction. And there's one section of Interstate 205, this 7 miles of the 26 miles of Interstate 205 that currently isn't 3 lanes in each direction. And so this addition of a 3rd lane on the interstate is a strategic completion of the system. And the drop from 3 lanes to 2 lanes is like the key source here of the bottleneck and the crashes for this section of 205. So adding this section completes the system, and that's been the plan in the current regional transportation plan. And that document is currently in the process is being updated for a 2023 update. So there has been for a number of years acknowledgement and a plan at both the regional level and the state level that doing this this completion is a system completion project as opposed to just adding a whole new roadway or new capacity somewhere else.
Yeah, I will say that's a fair representation of a metro and the RTP. It's a approved capacity.
All right.
The other part, the transit part.
Well, I can say also, as part of the RTP, there is a regional transit plan that's included in that. And then the transit service providers are responsible for kind of the detailed service planning in their area of jurisdiction. So those sort of plans do exist both at the transit agency level and for more of a regional view. And I know that there's been robust conversation happening as part of this RTP update for 2023, including high capacity transit and other transit needs. So that is in motion and has been part of previous processes, but is also very much a part of the conversations happening as part of this new RTP update.
But it won't be in West Lynn when we need it, probably.
I don't know the specifics of the conversations happening as part of the RTP update, but I will say again that ODOT is working to co-convene transit providers throughout the region to help them collaborate more closely and think about the best regional transit approach, knowing that we're looking at pricing on I-5 and I-205. So that work is really getting underway in earnest now.
Thank you.
Mandy, I got a few questions from the attendee group that I think are relevant to the conversation. So I'm just going to speak them into this. I think some of them can maybe be answered relatively quickly. The first one is, why is there not a general regional toll to cover the I-205 project? And I think the difference between like tolling on the bridge where the project is versus a regional toll that pays for projects in general. So that might be worth covering a distinction between the RMPP and the 205 thing. So why is there not a regional toll that pays for this project or for regional projects? The second question is, 220 still the assumed high traffic period toll? Is that still what's being modeled and mathed on? And then regarding mitigations, are they planned specifically to mitigate the diversion due to traffic avoiding the toll, or is it to mitigate diversion for other reasons as well? Those are the three questions that came in from the audience. I can try to put them in the chat, but there's a lot of context in here. It may take me a minute.
Okay, I think I've got all three, and if my memory fails me before I get to the end, just please remind me. So the first one, the distinction between the regional mobility pricing project and the I-205 toll project. So the I-205 toll project is looking at variable rate tolling on I-205 with gantry or toll collection points. Gantries are like this overhead structures that would be used to collect the tolls. Those would be at the Tualatin River and Abernathy bridges. And so that project, again, is envisioned as a way to provide construction funds for the full improvements on I-205 that are planned. Separately and in a coordinated fashion, we are looking at the regional mobility pricing project, which would look at variable rate pricing on all lanes of I-5 and I-205 in the Portland metro region, from Boone Bridge on I-5 up to the river, and I-205 in its entirety, not including the section that would be tolled already from the I-205 toll project. So that's our study area, and the actual gantry locations and the collection points to be determined as we move forward with NEPA for the regional mobility pricing project. So there's the distinction between the two projects. The next one was about assumptions for toll rates for the I-205 toll project. For the I-205 toll project, again, we are looking at a dual purpose here to provide funding for the transportation improvements in I-205 and also to manage congestion. So we are looking at what would be a set schedule, but where the rates would vary over time, with a higher rate when there's more congestion, a lower rate when it's off-peak travel hours. We make a variety of assumptions in our traffic modeling so that we're able to do the NEPA process. The final toll rates will be determined by the Oregon Transportation Commission about 6 months prior to implementation. So we're thinking mid-2024 for that final decision. And so for our analysis, we are looking at the highest rate of any of those timeframes during the day was, I think, between 4 and 6 p.m. And it would be $220 at each bridge. If you cross both bridges, it could be more than that. And again, it's for that 2-hour section of each day. It would be at that price, which is the assumption again, and not the definite answer. And then your next question, Trent, sorry.
Yeah, it was, and I'm sorry if I'm misphrasing this for the
the
person who sent this in, right? Mitigations, that these are planned to mitigate specifically the diversion due to avoiding the toll.
Yeah, the project combined together. So when we're looking at adding the lane and adding tolling, what do we see as the difference in terms of travel patterns and impacts? And so the mitigation has to tie directly to project impacts.
Thank you very much, and thanks to the audience members who are submitting those questions to me. Again, hope this proves that I'll get them into the chat as quick as I can. Commissioner Mitchell, and this is a new Oregon City Commissioner, so some of y'all may not have met him yet. So welcome to the group.
Thanks, Trent. When you look at the Oregon City slides that you showed referred to the Main and 7th intersection, I don't understand how it cannot be an impact in 2045, but that's a discussion for another day. That's not my real concern. My concern is that Main and 7th intersection is listed as impacted, but there's no mitigation that I saw that's been discussed. And if you think about West Lynn and Oregon City, think about an hourglass. What you're proposing, the mitigation you're proposing, is widening the ends, the top and the bottom of the hourglass, like out at 15th and on Willamette Falls Drive. But you can't move more sand through the hourglass if you can't fix the neck. And the neck is the Arch Bridge and Main Street in downtown Oregon City. And that's it's going to take a magician to fix that. So how are we going to deal with that? Because whatever we do at both ends, you're still going to have that neck of the hourglass right in downtown Oregon City.
I'm going to ask Nicole and/or Chris to jump in here and provide you some more details about what we've done and what we found.
Yeah, I think the specifics of that one would be best for Chris to jump in on, because I would just say that you're right in that we are not identifying a specific mitigation for 7th and Main, largely because that is just a 2027 impact and it's not an impact that continues long term. But we are proposing those, and there's a lot of physical constraints in that area. But we were proposing those pedestrian improvements, again looking at mobility overall in the area, and the other improvements to downtown Oregon City, just again kind of improving conditions for the area and moving traffic better throughout that area overall to help mitigate all of the impacts we're seeing there. But Chris, if you want to speak more specifically to 7th and Main.
Sure. One thing that we were finding, and that's again why we want to implement the monitoring program, is that we were finding more traffic was staying on I-205 and paying the tolls in 2045. And that's because the time penalty of taking an alternate route was higher in 2045. The system is just more congested. So we actually were seeing less diversion in 2045 than we were in 2027, proportionately. So, and that played out in some interesting ways, as Nicole mentioned, in terms of different traffic patterns. So it's not saying that 7th and Main all of a sudden gets wonderful in 2045. It's still a congested intersection and likely will be. So we did look at potential mitigation there that included some widening and things like that, which really wasn't consistent with what that downtown area wants to be. And in terms of the right of way and taking buildings and things like that. So we looked at what other mitigation, what other things are needed in downtown Oregon City. And in our mitigation workshop, one suggestion was, okay, there's some pedestrian improvements. Certainly we want to improve that promenade along the river, along Oregon 99E. We looked at some transit improvements, as was mentioned. We also looked at prohibiting turns at 7th and Main, and I know these things have been looked at for years, because this has been a problem spot for a long while. And the things we looked at after we worked with Oregon City staff, they probably would make the situation worse rather than better. So we pulled back on that. Where we're at right now with Oregon City, and I know we showed you that mitigation plan, is we're coordinating now with them and their consultants to take a closer look at what goes on within the downtown area, not just on 99E, and see how, because they're so close together, they're all connected. We just want to see how is the mitigation going to affect all of it. So this area is still being looked at. And what we showed you there was a pretty refined look at 99E, but again, we know that whatever you do on 99E is going to affect, or could potentially affect, things on Main Street. So the ultimate solution isn't identified there yet. And I guess I forget who asked the question, Commissioner Mitchell. Yeah.
Thanks, Chris.
Okay, Mr. McCabe, I see that hand.
Okay, I'm going off a question that was emailed to me from a person in the hamlet, because we have an issue out here. We're in RRFF 5, so carpooling is not allowed at any parking lots out here. And so the person's question is, if transit is upgraded, it could bring additional traffic into the Stafford area to park and rides, parking at Rolling Hills Church, etc. May cause more issues than it solves, bringing additional traffic on Stafford, Borland, and Johnson. And then another issue from a response that I got from a legislator, because you guys are talking about congestion. And one of the things that happens is they say it's because we're only 3 lanes out here. But once you get to Clackamas Town Center, from there all the way north, 3 lanes, congested most of the time. And the legislator told me that congestion isn't considered being congestion until the speed goes below 45. So when we have speeds of higher than 45, why are we being charged for, why is there consideration for charging for congestion? Because there is no congestion going on at that time. And another legislator also sent me an email response that there is supposed to be an alternative road for any place that any of these tollings are going on. So what is the alternative road to any of the tolling along 205? I can tell you it's Borland Road. and you guys aren't paying for any of it. And you stated today you don't have to pay for any of it. So that legislator basically would say, then you can't do this, because the people have to be given an alternative as they are in the Eugene Springfield area. And if you could address those two questions, I'd appreciate it.
Thanks, Mr. McCabe. I think without knowing the specifics of the conversation, I can say that we're looking at congestion levels in the future, in 2027 and 2045. And we do see that there's congestion, 13 or 14 hours a day in 2045 on I-205 if we do nothing. And if we do this project, we're seeing that congestion drop between 0 and 2 hours. So we look at the need today and the projected need in the future, and then the conditions in the future as we're doing the modeling. We're happy to share, more information about our findings with you in the committee after this meeting. And then the second one in terms of, I think the question was really about other roads.
Well, there was two questions. One was, in other words, there needs to be an alternative road to be able to be used. And there are no alternative roads along 205. If you take an example, I-205, once you get past a certain point, the parallel road or the alternative road is I-5 and vice versa. But when you're going 205, there is no alternative road. We're just the Band-Aid in the middle. And this legislator said that's not what they get, information they provided to ODOT, that there has to be an alternative road, and there is no alternative road for I-205 between I-5 and Oregon City. Once you get past Oregon City, technically you have two roads parallel, I-205 going north and south and I-5 going north and south. But in between, the 205 does not meet that definition, because the only alternative roads are local access roads. And that is what the legislators both informed ODOT they needed to look at. And I think we're all hearing that is not being brought into consideration, but those was part of the information that was provided to you, that was one of the considerations, is there had to be alternative roads. And what we're hearing is, no, we're just going to do pricing and people are going to stay on 205 by 2047. And all I can say to that is, I know I'm going to be dead by then, so I guess I'll never know.
I'd appreciate if you'd send me the specific language that you're referencing. I think that would be really helpful. And then I could have a more complete comment. There has been legislation that has been very directive to ODOT and the Transportation Commission, the first being House Bill 2017. That provided the direction to do this. There was a budget note that same year that provided the specific direction of looking at pricing for the 205 improvements project. And then more recently, last session, there was House Bill 3055, which did provide a language and direction about moving forward, developing a low-income toll program and looking at impacts and effects on the local system. So my understanding of that legislation is a little bit different than your framing of it. So again, I'm happy to look at whatever language you can provide me, and then let you know how we are incorporating that direction into our analysis.
Thanks. And John, I'm happy to get that to Mandy if you find that language or recall that conversation with that legislator. Feel welcome to work through me or work with Mandy directly. Happy to help either way. Councilor Lewis, I see your hand next, and we got about 15 minutes left in our schedule.
Yes, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I had to step away for a little bit, a similar time period when Commissioner Savas was away. So I apologize if this was addressed, but I guess my concern at this point is about, you've put forward slides that have intersections and not yet project level kind of description about what you're expecting. And every single one of these intersections could have any number of remedies. How do you contain what you are essentially recommending as diversionary impact projects into what you might call the scope of responsibility, because I've heard proportionality discussed, but how big is that pie that you're even starting with? If that makes sense, because I see what we initially were thinking was a significant budget to do this work being decreased. And in particular, when it comes to any transit options, I think that we've got TriMet putting forward their ability to get transit on corridor, and as a funding question, how are you looking at that? I know that there's infrastructure needs as well as operational needs. I understand the operational constraints and with funding, but are you ready to go fight for those funds to get released from other parts of the budget so that we can get that on the ground this session? So 2 questions in there, one big and one
Right.
narrow.
Right. And I, maybe I'll split them in the middle. I'm not sure. You know, I think part of the conversation is with other folks at ODOT and elsewhere in terms of like what is the option for other sources of funding. But what I can say is that once we have identified the mitigation, it is required to fund and to implement. And ODOT can use a variety of funding sources to do the implementation. So we really need to identify what it is that needs to be built or included in the project. And then we figure out when and how do we fund it and build it. And it may be that toll revenue is the source for some of the funds, and there may be a variety of other sources that are available. So that will be the one of the next steps after we confirm what exactly it is that's needed and what's the time frame that it's needed in. And then in terms of like proportionality, there are a couple projects where we're looking at a shared, like that we'd be looking for shared investment approach and strategy. And again, once we understand exactly what the project is, then we can have more detailed conversations with the jurisdiction in terms of how do we work together to make sure that it happens.
Thank you.
Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, I think I have a question for Chris. Chris, I realize that the diversion that we're experiencing today is at peak hour, in and around those periods of time. And I certainly realize that peak hour is not, Saturday afternoon or non-working days, or maybe at noon on Monday through Friday. That's not really peak hour. Maybe in certain parts of the region it might be, but along this corridor it's not. And my question to you is that in the analysis, are you only looking at peak hour traffic, or were there any problems that were cited that were non-peak or just normal Monday through or Sunday through Saturday? I mean, can you just give me some insight? Is it only peak hour?
Yeah, for traffic operations, it has been peak hour, and that's what the mobility standards are set up to measure as well. That's what jurisdictions look at, because generally speaking, that's when the worst conditions occur. So for traffic operations, yes, we've focused on peak hours, and if we improve things so that it can accommodate the peak hour, it should be able to accommodate the rest of the hours of the day. Safety analysis, we actually feed in daily traffic volumes there. Same thing with the multimodal for pedestrians and bicycle analyses. So that looks at a kind of a daily estimate of level of traffic stress based on daily numbers. But the traffic operations does focus on peak hours. So.
Okay. Well, the reason I ask is this, and maybe it's my background being a small business owner that had a storefront and a brick and mortar locations in this county and other counties as well. But and that is that right now the people, the businesses along Wyoming Falls Drive and or Main Street, Oregon City, and through there have horrific traffic congestion at certain hours of time today. I mean, if I was a business, I might as well just close the doors or just hope on for some kind of walk-in traffic. But it's unbearable, for anyone to try to either leave their place of business because it's bumper to bumper, or even to get to their place of business. So transit doesn't move, nothing moves. It's just locked. It's just gridlock. So I'm just wondering for the business impacts, and I'm sure you all haven't studied that. Now we're changing the dynamic to where the incentive for people to divert is not just rush hour, it's money. So if it's Saturday afternoon and how many people are going to divert on Saturday afternoon and impact their businesses or their communities in their neighborhoods that they never had experience on a Saturday or a noon time and so forth. So their livelihood is not really being analyzed if you're only focusing on peak hour.
Yep, I do hear that. So yeah, what you're saying is off peak or weekends or non-peak hours, people may have, they're diverting because of the toll. And granted, the tolls are less during the off-peak time. So the idea is that we want to keep more people on the tolled facility. But still speaking, it should not be as bad as the peak periods. So we did do, and Nicole could probably speak to this, an economic impacts study, which did look at expected impacts to businesses and the economy in general.
I would just add, Chris, I'll add Commissioner's Office, like this would be, I think, a key part of going back to the monitoring conversation. Like if this is an issue that is of concern and these are, like this would be a possibility for us to think about, okay, well, we want to pay specific attention to weekends or certain locations or, certain routes. That is like possible for us to add in as we're thinking about our monitoring approach.
Yeah, thank you. And I would certainly think Main Street in Oregon City would be one of those locations that you'd want to monitor.
Well, and as well as Highway 43 and 99E and all along. Right. I thank you for the answer. Your answer also included words that are going to stick in my brain. I'm not going to forget them. That the economic analysis was in general. And so if it's really not specific into, and it sounds like there has been no traffic analysis during off peak hour, that there could be significant impacts to these businesses. And do they fight them all by themselves individually, or they just pack up and leave and no one knows that the reason they left or they closed their shop or they lost their livelihood is because of these impacts? I'm very concerned about that. The analysis hasn't, and I've been asking for that economic analysis. But if you're not doing the traffic analysis during off peak hour, then you're really not doing, frankly, the process and the economic analysis any justice. Thank you.
Well, Chris, can I just maybe clarify here about the traffic analysis that was done and whether that did include peak as well as off-peak hours?
Yeah, for traffic analysis, it is focused on the peak periods. So we looked at a 2-hour peak period. And again, this is industry standard approach because the peak periods have to accommodate the most volume. And if you make any improvements to accommodate those, then it should address any other hours of the day. That being said, there may be unique situations, Main Street on a Saturday, maybe, that are impacted such that it makes things worse for businesses. And as Mandy said, monitoring that and seeing if that's happening would be a good thing. So I've also seen where certain businesses have actually like more traffic going by their business because it could generate more business. But it really depends on if you can access that business and get in and out of it, as you were saying. But yeah, something to keep in mind.
And I just wanted to say quickly on the economic analysis, which we can certainly provide more information on, and since we won't be able to do that in the few minutes we have left here today, but we do look at daily volume. The economic analysis does take the overall volume input. So it's not just focused on that peak hour too. So there is information about from the regional travel demand model, the daily volumes that go into that economic analysis. So, and there is some analysis of specific business impacts, specific locations, including downtown Oregon City and others, and how those areas might be affected from an economic standpoint.
Commissioner, I see you talking, but
Yeah, I'll just close with this. There's also the safety elements, let alone the business elements that, I know that, in areas, and I know this county pretty well because I hear from people complain all the time where they won't let their kids out in the street, during certain times of the day or certain days of the week because of the traffic. This is going to incentivize people to divert at 24 hours a day. It's going to make some of those neighborhoods unsafe 24 hours a day. I'll close there.
So we are at time. I want to just highlight one last comment to the ODOT team that came in right there at the end from Councilor Baumgartner about people basically diverting away from commuting in to these communities who might want to come in and provide economic just buy things. Is really what I'm trying to say there. And that's reflective of some comments from the C4 table and many of the C4 comments, and why they've requested many times that the RMPP and the I-205 toll program are implemented at the same time so that it doesn't create that type of economic diversion. So just wanted to capture, what was sort of, I think, intended by that last comment there, and reflective of other comments that come out of the C4 groups. I also want to make sure that ODOT gets a chance to sort of highlight here at the end that, and this is what y'all told me, please tell me if I'm wrong, that the EA is going to be released or published here within the next month or two, that some of this information will be in there, but that the information presented today is sort of a preview to some of that, but could still change when it's finally published, when the EA is actually published. So this is this video will be recorded for people to come back and take a look at it, but it doesn't represent, it's a snapshot in time, right? What the EA says when it comes out is what should be looked at for comments in the future. Is that correct?
Correct. It's a helpful recap. So we are still in active conversations about some of these locations. And so there will be very similar graphics and information in the EA. It might look slightly different than what you saw today. The bulk of the information should be largely the same. And then the first publication is the draft. And so we will take more comments on the draft and continue working until we have the final. We do expect the draft to come out in the February timeframe, and then move forward with the final.
Thank you very much. This has been recorded, so when I turn it off, it'll take me a little time to get it on the webpage. So for those of you who want to share it with your colleagues or city councils or whomever, you can look probably in the morning to that diversion subcommittee page where we post all things C4. So I'll look for it there in the morning and it should be up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.